Hello, my name is Jessie Kornberg, and I am the CEO and President of the Skirball Cultural Center. Thanks for tuning in to a Curator Talk. This was originally presented to our members and donors. Members and donors sustain the Skirball's commitment to upholding timeless Jewish values. They allow us to present these exhibitions and programs in order to foster a greater sense of discovery and hope. They help us expand our connections to one another, and ultimately we hope that they inspire in each of us a deeper commitment to help build a more just society. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the program.
Hi, great to see all of you. I see so many familiar faces today, and I also had the pleasure of meeting some new people who came up and introduced themselves, so really welcome. It's such a treat to share with all of you, our members, our new exhibitions, and it feels very spring-like today, and we're just excited to be unveiling these exhibitions to you. In some ways, these two shows are strikingly different from one another. Jack Kirby, Heroes and Humanity, offers really an expansive look at the 60-year output of a creator who shaped American culture through his characters, his stories, and his artistry. Away in the Catskills, Summers, Sour Cream, and Dirty Dancing is, in contrast, really an intimate and personal exhibition in which contemporary artist Marisa Futernick reflects on the lives of her own maternal relatives who vacationed in the Catskills at the mid-20th century. But these two exhibitions do resonate with one another in important ways that I'm going to touch on this afternoon. And these are ways that speak to the Skirball's mission and identity as a Jewish American cultural center. And it really feels good to be talking about our identity as a Jewish American Cultural Center as we look ahead to Jewish American History Month, which begins tomorrow. So we try to think of everything. We didn't exactly plan it that way, but tell others that we did. First, I'm going to talk about some of the ways these shows resonate with one another. First, both exhibitions shed light on the complex legacy of Jewish immigration to the U.S. in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the single largest population of Jews landed on American shores, including my own grandparents and great-grandparents, and I'm sure many family members of people in this room. Jack Kirby's parents and Marisa Futernick's great-grandparents were among the 2 million Jews who fled Europe at that time, seeking for their families the freedom and opportunity that American democracy promised. The reality of what the children and grandchildren of these immigrants experienced was far more complex than that promise. Jack Kirby, born Jacob Kurtzberg in 1917, did rise from humble beginnings on the Lower East Side to build a remarkable career. But like other Jews in the comic book industry, he did so under an Americanized name and in one of the few creative fields that was open to Jews of his generation. While he invented iconic American heroes like Captain America, and he invented narratives that captivated broad U.S. audiences, and while he fought patriotically for his country on the European battlefield, anti-Semitism at home posed a real and immediate threat. With the 1939 Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden, for example, taking place just blocks from his office. Marisa Futernick's mother, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, unlike the first-generation immigrants who preceded them and paved the way, enjoyed many of the pleasures that American middle-class life afforded. They danced the Watusi, listened to Frankie Lyman records, and took summer vacations, kibitzing in Yiddish around the pool. But in the post-war years, many American leisure destinations still closed their doors to Jews, sometimes even running ads that said, "No Hebrews allowed." And this is why the Catskills became a mecca for Jewish American families, and as it turns out, a haven for various other marginalized communities as well. This simultaneous sense of welcome and exclusion, of opportunity and obstacles, and even of enjoyment and hardship, and the ability to embrace these things as two sides of the same coin is a common thread within the Jewish American experience. The second point I want to make today is that this thread weaves its way through both the Kirby and Catskills exhibitions. which, like so many Skirball exhibitions, are at once intentionally lighthearted and serious, entertaining and deeply substantive. Kirby infused his fanciful stories and imagined worlds with mythical and biblical content and real-world relevance, which is part of why his work is so rich and has relevance for creators to this very day. Marisa Futernick, while playfully capturing her relatives' period bathing suits, which you see on display here, and teased hairdos, also meditates wistfully and profoundly on their sense of Jewish community, which she feels is lost to her and to other acculturated American Jews of her generation. Finally, and again, perhaps shaped by the complexity of the Jewish American experience, and perhaps by the centuries-old Jewish experience of marginalization, both Jack Kirby and Marisa Futernick bring characters to life in their work who are multidimensional and deeply human. This is part of Kirby's legacy, the creation of characters infused with humanity, with whom you can really empathize. Like the Fantastic Four, a family of superheroes who have special powers, but also squabble and bicker and love one another as real family members do. Something similar can be said of Marisa Futernick's portrayal of her relatives, who are relatable in their unvarnished frankness and beautiful imperfection. The ability to recognize other people's humanity, to see one another in 3 dimensions and see ourselves in others, is what we seek to inspire and cultivate first and foremost at the Skirball Cultural Center through all of our offerings. We really hope that each of you, our valued members, find inspiration and connection to your own lives and histories in these 2 exhibitions. And we just hope you enjoy going to see them today and to learning more about them in this program. So now it's my pleasure to call to the stage our chief curator, Cate Thurston, and artist Marisa Futernick, who will be in dialogue about Away in the Catskills.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you this afternoon. It is my great pleasure to spend a little time talking about this exhibition. I'd like to introduce the artist. She is an interdisciplinary artist here in Los Angeles and writer. She works in a variety of mediums, and we're going to talk a little bit about this exhibition, how it came to be, and a little bit about her practice. So we met for the first time, I think, in 2019.
Yeah, it's been a long time. We've been talking about doing a show on this subject.
And what first drew me to your work was this series of 15 prints that we have in the exhibition. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the prints themselves and why you created them.
Yeah, so the prints in the exhibition, that series of prints are called Dirty Dancing. And I made them in 2017, although they've only been shown once before this exhibition. But they are made from a group of archival slides that I had from my mother's family summer vacations in the Catskills in the late 60s. And so I had these images in my studio for quite some time, and they were really compelling images, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with them. And I work with photography and writing in my practice. And normally, I don't use found photographs. I take photographs myself. I still shoot slides and analog film. Sometimes I shoot digital as well, but it was unusual for me to make something out of some existing photographic material. But these images were really compelling, and I made those prints in a fairly intuitive way. And I paired the photographs with different dance crazes from the era. So each print has text underneath the image, do the Watusi, do the mashed potato. And underneath that text is a really short bit of invented dialogue that I wrote. And some of those dialogues are based on family anecdotes, and some are completely made up, or me just trying to sort of imagine what conversations would have been like. And a lot of those are conversations between women. But at the point when I made those prints, I'd never been to the Catskills. I hadn't really done any research. And so having the time to work on this exhibition really enabled me to dig a lot deeper into the history of that place, to actually go to the Catskills. And so the other works in the exhibition are a new video, which is kind of like a slideshow of still images that's a mixture of old family photographs and new photographs that I took last summer in the Catskills.
And I want to interject really quickly. The postcards you have on your tables are from the video work. We've made them into postcards that are available in gallery. These are just a selection of 4. They're actually 6, so there's a little bit of excitement for you to look out for there. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to you to talk more about the video work.
Yeah, so the video is called I Never Learned to Play Mahjong. And so it's several hundred photographs, and there's a voiceover narration that's me speaking as myself and as my mother and as my grandmother, and it has music as well. It has original music in it, but it was really great for me to have some time in preparing for this exhibition to do some archival research about the history of the Catskills, to talk to historians in the area and people who are local, and to actually go to the place and really just be there and see what it's like now and try to imagine what it had been like. And really, my mother died in 2020. Pretty suddenly, and so the work is also very much about my mother and my grandmother, and loss of family history, and not having anyone to ask a lot of questions about who's in these pictures, what was it like when you were in this place, and a lot of just kind of gaps in my own personal family history and also kind of wider histories.
The theme of loss in this exhibition really stands out to me, and I find it very moving how that's punctuated by the humor that you employ. They exist equally to me in a way that's really interesting. On the slide behind me, this is a print, Do the Watusi. I've actually taken the text from it below here because it's kind of hard to see. And I want to skip ahead to Do the Jerk, where we have this picture of your mother as a teenager. This one's very funny. Is this one based on real story, or is this an invented story?
No, the actual dialogue is invented, but this photograph is my mother and her younger brother, my uncle, and their cousin, who my mother's father kind of took care of other extended family as well, so he took care of his sister and her son. And well, I'll read it. You still making him drink the raw eggs? He's too skinny for a boy. I should be so lucky. My uncle was skinny, and apparently they tried to fatten him up when he was a kid. But one of the things that suggests a little bit in the video work is, I think, appearance. I mean, it's kind of. My mother was still alive when I made those prints, and I had to make sure she was comfortable with me having work that had pictures of her in a bathing suit.
Yeah.
And my mother's mother, my grandmother in the bathing suit. And there's something about body image for women in my family that's kind of there too. So so I think that line kind of touches on that too.
I want to go back to the loss and the title, I Never Learned to Play Mahjong. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So my grandmother said that she was going to teach me how to play mahjong when I was old enough, and she got too sick and died before that happened. And then my mother didn't really know how to play, and I saved my grandmother's mahjong set. And then when I started working on this exhibition last year, I met somebody here in LA who offered to teach me how to play mahjong. And I did want to learn, and I was busy with other things, and it was a little bit complicated, but I also kind of realized when I was making this work that part of me didn't want to learn how to play mahjong. I just wanted my grandmother to teach me how to play mahjong. But my grandmother's mahjong set is in the exhibition as part of an installation of objects.
I actually have a photo of that. I'll skip ahead. This was taken in Marisa's studio in Glendale. It looks a little bit different in gallery. I like that we had a window into your process here, so forgive me for including a kind of rough shot. This is not exactly how it's assembled in gallery. This is us playing with it a little bit. But
yes, I mean, this work is kind of different from things I've made before. I work with text and image in all different kinds of ways. So with slide installation, with video, I make books as well, and prints, and I sometimes make paintings. I've done stuff with radio, but I don't really normally do things with objects. So this was in my studio, experimenting with these different objects, some of which were family objects. Some of them have very sort of specific significance. And I encourage you, when you go to the gallery, there's a little publication in a box on the wall next to these objects, and you're welcome to take one. And it's got some little pieces of text or little stories that really give more insight into what these objects are. So some of them are old things from my family. There are 3 stones that I gathered on a hike in the Catskills last summer.
And can you tell us why the significance of the stones for those who aren't familiar?
So the stones are this video work and really the whole exhibition. Was just thinking so much about my mother and my grandmother and my great-grandmother who I didn't know, and not just memories of these women, but actually me being these women and feeling that I am my mother and I am my grandmother. And the voiceover for the video is me slipping in and out of narrating through my mother and my grandmother and myself. And so the stones were, to me, it was this thing of stacking the generations on top of each other. And there was also the reference to visitation stones in a cemetery. So the stones were, they're a little different from most of the other objects in the installation, but they were kind of an important addition for me.
And I cut you off. You were leading to the Andes mints, which I think is...
Andes.
The Andes. The naked Andes mints, actually.
Does anyone still buy or eat Andes? Oh, okay. A lot of chat about Andes.
Okay, the room has come alive.
Yes. So Andes, when I was playing with these objects in my studio and thinking about how I wanted to show them in the gallery, I knew I wanted them to be part of this exhibition, to have something that was not just the photographic material, but something that was actual objects, to add a different kind of warmth to the exhibition. So I had these other objects, and then I started... Somehow I thought about Andes, and both of my grandmothers would always have Andes for, like, if they had company over, there'd be a dish of Andes on the coffee table, and I really associated them with my grandmothers, and my grandmother showing me how to fold the wrapper into a little fan after you eat the candy. And in talking to other people who did not have the same cultural upbringing that I had, they also had these very nostalgic associations with Andes and grandparents and this idea of them being something that they're not expensive and you buy them at the drugstore, but they seem so fancy, especially to my grandparents' generation. It was a fancy thing to have them.
Yeah.
So I started playing with piles of Andes in the studio as part of this installation. And so you'll see them here in the gallery. And I believe they will also be available in the shop.
We are selling them for 5 cents in the gift shop. The reason I said naked Andes is because we're a museum. We cannot have food in gallery. Our museum staff would be quite cranky with us. So one of our team members actually gently tapped the mints out of every Andes mint you see in gallery so that they're perfect. They look like there's a mint in there, but there is nothing in there. Yeah.
So don't try to take one because you will be
it.
very disappointed when you open it.
So we've talked a little bit about the Prince Dirty Dancing, which are a reference to the hit film. And I want to talk a little bit about that title because it seems obvious, but there's a lot of themes that overlap. Can you tell me a little bit more about the title and why you chose that for the Prince?
The Prince have these dances in them. So it seemed like a natural title. But also, I think the movie Dirty Dancing is kind of interesting because I lived in London for many years, and before moving me back to the US, and I made those prints when I was still in London. And talking to people there who knew that movie very well, they didn't know the characters were supposed to be Jewish. And I realized they don't actually ever say explicitly that anyone in the movie is Jewish, which is an interesting thing to me. But there's a lot of feminist undercurrents to the film too, and I think that's kind of something that I've thought about a lot in the work in this exhibition. And changing roles and freedoms for women of my grandmother's generation and my mother's and mine. And so that was actually, I think people think of the movie Dirty Dancing as being, this romantic movie, and it's very nostalgic, but there's kind of more going on there.
Yeah, it's also a story about reproductive justice and class.
Yeah.
And there's dancing. It's a really interesting movie when you think about it.
Yeah.
So we have the prints, we have the new video work. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking before we go about the video work. It's new for the exhibition, it's never been shown before. What about the research process and the Catskills surprised you?
It was really great to just be in that place on that land where my family had been. And ahead of going up there last summer, I'd already started doing some reading and connecting with some people there. And I'd already known about Casa Susana, which there was a PBS documentary and a book about a few years ago, which was a haven for trans people in the Catskills. But I started finding out that there were hotels and resorts that were owned by and or catered specifically to other groups who didn't have easy access to spaces of leisure. So there are Irish American resorts, Italian American resorts, African American resorts. I think I even read something about Greek American and Armenian resorts. There were some places where Puerto Rican and Dominican communities from New York City would go to vacation too. So I was trying to find out a little bit more about those histories. I think there's been a lot written about the Borscht Belt, and I'm not a historian, and I think there was a lot of information already out there about a certain narrative of Jewish American vacationing in that region in a particular time. But it was interesting to learn about some of those other histories, and also to see what the place is like now. And so, many of the big hotels and resorts from mid-century are gone now, but the bungalow colonies, which I also, before I started doing research, didn't know about this whole history of bungalow colonies, which was another type of vacationing that people did in that region. Instead of staying at hotels or resorts, it was generally very inexpensive. My family was very working class, and they were able to go for a whole summer in the 40s because you could rent a bungalow for very, very little. So kind of seeing that actually a lot of the big hotels, resorts are gone, but a lot of the bungalow colonies are still there. A lot of the structures are still there, and there are still communities who are vacationing there. So there are a lot of Orthodox communities from New York who vacation there in the summer. There are also year-round communities. There are yeshivas. Some of the bungalow colonies have been turned into yeshivas, and the swimming pool is now a shul. And so there's other stuff still happening there. It's not that, this idea that it came and went and everything is gone. And
it's changed.
It's just changed. It's just different. But there's still, in some ways, the Sullivan County historian who I had spoken to as part of my research process, he really talks about how, John Conway, about how it's actually kind of just the way things were in the beginning of Jewish vacationing in the Catskills in the 20th century, that there are actually a lot of parallels now to what things were like then.
We have run out of time. I hope everyone heads into gallery to spend a little bit of time in the Catskills. I also want to call out that while this story is specific to Marisa's family, in thinking about leisure and what is gained in pursuit of the American dream and what is lost, we realized that people of all backgrounds had very similar experiences. And so those postcards are a Share Your Story interactive in gallery. You can write your story out and leave it for our visitors to see, or you can take it with you and send a postcard to a friend. There's no wrong answer. We just hope you take this little gesture of welcome with you. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our next group of speakers to the stage, Deputy Director Exhibitions Michelle Urton, who will introduce the rest of the curatorial team for Jack Kirby, Heroes in Humanity.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce the co-curators for this exhibition, Patrick Reed and Ben Saunders. Ben is to my immediate left. Patrick is a New York-based pop culture historian and journalist. He's the co-curator of Marvel Earth's Mightiest Exhibition and Spider-Man Beyond Amazing, the exhibition. He's the founder of the Hip Hop and Comics Culture Combining series of conferences and programs. He curated the Hip Hop and Comics Show, a pop-up exhibit that illustrates the essential connections between hip-hop culture and mass media arts. Ben Saunders founded the program in comic studies at the University of Oregon, the first of its kind in the country, though there are many more now. He has published widely on a variety of literary and cultural topics, from plays on Shakespeare to the popular music of Little Richard. He's an Eisner-nominated comics scholar and series editor of the Penguin Classics Marvel Collection, and has co-curated or curated more than half a dozen comics-themed exhibitions. Reed and Saunders have collaborated most recently in the celebrated exhibition Marvel Universe of Superheroes, which is currently in Germany at the moment. Cologne. And before we begin, I would just love to see, from a show of hands, who in this room is familiar with Jack Kirby? Great, okay. I want to start by asking, let me ask you, Patrick, can you tell us about Ben's early life in New York?
Jack's early life in New York?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, this is, Ben, let's actually sort of tag team this one. Jack Kirby was born in the Lower East Side, grew up in the sort of hard-scrabble, rough-and-tumble streets of the Jewish tenement neighborhoods. And that picture up there is sort of fanciful memoir self-portrait, I guess you'd say.
It's from the only work of comics memoir that he did, although Jack being Jack, he sort of gives the lie to the idea that there's any distinction between fiction and autobiography. Jack is in all of his work, but this is the only explicit work of memoir, and it is the Lower East Side of his memory, and he has infused it with all of the energy of a combat zone. I think it's just. This was always one of the pieces that I wanted to make sure that people were seeing. I think it. I learned about the existence of New York City from Jack Kirby's comics, so so I still have a real romance of the place, and this is a favorite image of mine.
Yeah, New York is sort of a character in the majority of his works, whether it's where his superheroes are based or whether it's this memoir comic.
I want to take us to 1939, and I'll just ask you both, since you speak so well together, to talk about this moment in American history, in Jack's life, and in comic book production. Tell us how we get here.
Well, that is a photo of the German-American Bund Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. This was one block from where Jack's first real art gig was, working at Fleischer Studios, the animation studio. And Jack, as a first-generation Jewish American, was very conscious of the threat of anti-Semitism and the threat posed by the Nazi Party And Ben, you want to pick up from there?
Well, I just think, they came to the neighborhood, didn't they? I mean, this is the largest ever Nazi rally, officially anyway, on U.S. soil, and this would have been where he would have gone to see sporting events, and both him and his creative partner at the time, Joe Simon. So it is, I think, not a coincidence that just a few short months later they end up creating one of their most iconic characters, whose job is to punch Nazis.
Yeah.
And that's Captain America. But actually, can I just say a little thing? I was teaching some students about this just the other day, and I was reminded of what happened to the organizers of this event, and it's a story worth telling. So the head of the German American Bund at the time, shortly after this event was held, it turned out that it was, all these Nazis paid for a ticket. And the leader of the Bund embezzled $14,000 from that and spent it mostly on his mistress and vacations, apparently. And I put that very scientifically into one of those inflation calculators, and it's the equivalent of about $250,000 that he embezzled. So he was arrested. His successor as the head of the Bund then turned out to be an actual Nazi spy who, when he was uncovered in 1943, fled to Mexico, but they returned him and jailed him for 15 years for espionage. So the lesson here is that Nazis are grifters. They're always grifters.
And it's also worth noting this other image here, Captain America Comics #1, one of Jack and his partner Joe Simon's most famous single images. That issue was actually published, landed on stands in December of 1940.
Yeah.
So a full year before America actually entered into World War II. And this is, so this was not just a reaction to the immediate occurrences around him. This was a call to arms. This was a rallying cry.
Yeah, it's a cry for intervention. I mean, it's actually, I know it seems unlikely to describe an image like this as subtle, but it's actually making quite a subtle argument. You could see behind Hitler's shoulder there is a map of the USA, and then we have a very carefully labeled folder that says sabotage plans for USA. And then back there on the TV screen, it's a US munitions plant that's being blown up. Now, obviously, this is, as Patrick already said, 12 months before Pearl Harbor. So this is put all those things together, and what you have is a piece of popular propaganda saying that we should not see this as an act of policing, but as an act of self-defense. This was not, a widely held view. There were a large number of people in the United States at the time who did not want to see the U.S. get involved in the war in Europe, and clearly Jack and Joe felt really differently about that. It means this is not just Captain America's first appearance on the cover of a comic, it's also Hitler's first appearance on the cover of a comic. Nobody else wanted to touch it.
I want to stop here. We won't have time to cover, there's a lot to see in the exhibition, so we won't have time to cover all of the areas. But I do want to stop here and talk about what Jack does with Joe Simon after the war in terms of genre work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Jack went off, joined the Army, was sent overseas in 1943, and served on the front lines, landed on the beaches of Normandy, fought Nazis in person, face-to-face, after having done it artistically for years. And when he and Joe Simon returned from the war, the world had shifted a bit. Suddenly superheroes were no longer the dominant genre in comic books. And so being quick-thinking individuals and artists who made their living this way, they quickly expanded and began dabbling in all sorts of different genres and inventing some new genres of comic books along the way.
Yeah, what they had realized is that a large section of the audience had been neglected. They invented the genre of romance comics. Obviously, the genre of the romance pulp existed. It was, the idea of romance as popular fiction already existed, but there were
People had been in love before then.
People had been in love, but there were no romance comics, and it actually so their first romance book, Young Romance, was actually their biggest hit since Captain America, and it created so many imitators. Some of you may recall romance comics being on the stands right up into the 1970s. But it was not the only genre they pivoted to. They created crime comics, horror comics, Western comics. Some of Jack's personal favorites material was some of the Western work they did, all of which would then feed into the reinvention of the superhero that Jack was a pivotal figure in the 1960s. Yeah, with that's one of my favorite pieces. You guys are in for a treat.
So let's talk about that. Talk about the Fantastic Four.
Well, boy, you realize that we could spend the rest of our time on stage.
I'm sorry, I have to rephrase that, or you'll never get to see the exhibition. Talk about the structure of the Fantastic Four and how that was new in the genre.
Well, Jack was constantly creating, constantly innovating. I gather that he was someone who got bored very easily and did not enjoy repeating himself. So when, after having with Joe Simon and then independently worked in all of these other genres, at the turn of the 1960s, there seemed to be a bit of a surge in superheroes becoming popular again. And rather than just do what he had done before, Jack was working with Stan Lee as his editor and scripter, and they created a team that was sort of more human and more identifiable. They had noticeable flaws. They were not simply square-jawed, one-dimensional heroic characters. They had backstories. They had personal issues. They were a family. They both fought and loved each other dearly. They worried about paying the rent and sometimes got evicted from their headquarters. Mm-hmm. Because even if you have powers, it doesn't mean that you can always, make rent on time.
Yeah, well, it was a... some of you may be aware that there's been, this whole superhero movie phenomenon in the last 25 years. And the direct line from Jack Kirby's work to the cultural dominance of the superheroes, and particularly Marvel's superheroes in the multiplexes, it begins with the Fantastic Four. I think what Jack was doing was taking everything that he'd learned from all of those other genres, including romance, including science fiction, including the Western, and bringing together ultimately this formula that balances the domestic with the extraordinary, or the cosmic with the quotidian, so that you have this family who are like all families, sometimes squabble, sometimes don't get along, but they're set against then these apocalyptic, cosmos-threatening adventures and journeys of discovery. And that combination of the vast and the apocalyptic, and then the humorous and the unlikely family of choice, as well as sometimes as family of origin, that seems to be the essence of the Marvel formula. And it really derives from what they were doing in the Fantastic Four, which is the book that I think was also dearest to Jack's heart in this period. He drew it for 100 issues. It's an unbroken string. It was a record for a long time.
And it features a character, Ben Grimm, the Thing, who, despite his orange rocky exterior, is pretty much a stand-in for Jack. He is a kid from the hardscrabble streets of the Lower East Side, mm-hmm. Is not always sometimes speaks in, uses a little bit of slang, doesn't necessarily speak in the Superman ideal way, and really served as Jack's stand-in. He is someone who is always motivated by love and by family and by community.
It's one of those things actually that makes me, again, it's become the essence of Marvel, but it's really Jack, a character that looks like a monster, but every time he opens his mouth, you realize this is a guy from the Lower East Side. That is the kind of thing that I think we're all just catching up with that now. This is just one example of the way in which Jack's fingerprints are all over the imagination of the 21st century.
With that, I will go on to the next thing I'd love to be sure that we cover. We've got a number of really important loans to this exhibition, some from the Kirby family, that look at the Black Panther. Can you talk about the first time that we see the Black Panther and the trajectory of that character through Jack's career and into current day?
Me first? Yeah. Well, so yeah, in the not coincidentally significant year of 1966, Stan and Jack introduced the Black Panther into the pages of the Fantastic Four, the first black superhero in the Marvel Universe. And they also, at the same time, introduced the nation of Wakanda, and they were simply reversing all of the racist tropes that they were familiar with from jungle adventure stories at the time. So the idea that, for example, in every Tarzan movie they'd ever seen, the only vision of Africa you ever see is of a jungle and a primitive society. So they decided, what if actually the most technologically advanced human society on Earth is in Africa? And they called it Wakanda, and it has been an idea that many creators since have run with.
Yeah, and as T'Challa, the king of this country, is the Black Panther. He is not only the first black superhero in mainstream American comics, he is a figure who is undeniably heroic. He is the sovereign ruler of this technologically advanced society. And in that one moment, they also subverted the entire perception of not only what African societies look like, but the role of what a black man could be in modern society.
Incredible. Thank you. Now, I know, Ben, you could talk about this photo in quite a bit, but I put these two slides on because they offer a couple of opportunities. The first is when you go into the gallery, you'll see the piece on the left is one of a few that is actually penciled, so you can see Jack's pencil work. In comic art, an inker comes through and inks over all of Jack's lines, so it's a collaborative piece. But in this particular piece, you're able to just see the pencil lines. And in the piece on the right, you get to see Jack using color. This is all Jack here, and so you get a sense of what his feel for color is. I'd like you both to chat about that.
Well, Jack Kirby was an artist for a living. He would spend 10, 12, 14 hours a day at his drawing board. In his downtime, he would continue to make art. That is also his recreational activity. So he drew and made collages. You can see this piece here is actually a hybrid of paint, pencil, ink, and collage. And he constantly was creating new worlds, new stories, but also creating just images for his own pleasure, envisioning new characters. That is a concept drawing for a character that eventually he took to DC Comics, and was constantly just sort of experimenting, expanding his palette. And a lot of what we try to do in this show is discuss, the fictional history of the characters, but also Jack's real life, and then his artistic evolution.
And the other thing I guess you can see here is his lifelong detestation of fascists, because it's long after the war has ended, but this villain that you're seeing here, this is a portrait of a character called Darkseid, who is a kind of cosmic authoritarian fascist dictator. And as you can see, he's got all the sort of arrogance and pride and disdain for whatever it is he's looking upon. That's us, I guess. It's essentially Mussolini in a space helmet, and this is, again, when I was, sort of comes back to what I was saying earlier. Of there's a thematic continuity even as his style evolves, and Jack's hostility to fascism was lifelong.
More collages.
More collage.
More hybrid
yes.
works.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I would love for you to talk about how different this was from everything else that was happening in comic books at the time.
Sure. I mean, this is, you'd be forgiven for thinking, so I never had an opportunity to meet Jack. I wish I had. I've read as much about him as I can, and as far as I can gather, he was fairly straight edge. There's no evidence that he was sort of belatedly, dropping acid or anything like that. But there's this period in the mid-'60s where it's like he took a ride on Kesey's bus or something. And the work takes off into a sort of a new level of trippy grandeur. And at the same time, he's absolutely pushing at the limits of what was still perceived as a children's medium in terms of what it was that he was able to do. This is newsprint, and this is stuff that nobody would have considered the work, people who drew comics were not artists in the minds of most people. But what Jack was doing, well, if you took this, you paid your 10, 15 cents and you took this off the newsstands and flipped it over and you saw pages like this, this was almost scary for kids. This was their visual culture. This is prior to the existence of the internet. It did not look like anything else on the stands. There were no other comic books on the stands that had these kinds of effects in them.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, part of what makes this exhibition so special is that comics were a purely disposable entertainment medium. They were cranked out as quickly as possible to entertain the kids, much like the pop records and the dance crazes that were being discussed earlier. No one anticipated that there would be an audience for these things the moment that the record slipped down the charts or the moment that the comic came off the stands. They needed to have another one ready to go so the kids would have something new to buy. And as a result, they were reproduced very cheaply on the cheapest possible paper. And getting a chance to see these items up close, Jack was not only pushing the visual limits of comics, he was pushing at the absolute edge of printing technology. And so getting a chance to see these items up close in person in these galleries gives you a whole appreciation for the artistry and the craft that you would never have no matter, I love the print comics. I grew up reading them, but getting to see these objects in person, there's a depth and a meticulousness and an artistry to this work that is really, really astonishing.
Yeah.
And we should say that this is really at its core an art exhibition. Most of the pieces in the exhibition are original art. We have a selection of comic books that are very important as well, and personal effects that were lent by the Kirby family. But really what you'll be seeing when you go into this exhibition is Jack's original art.
Yeah, the hand-drawn originals are a revelation. When you consider that nobody who worked in the comics industry is paid by the detail, they're paid by the page. So the kind of work that a lot of these artists, Jack included, are putting into the page, they're doing for themselves, particularly when the work would then get reproduced at half the size and in newsprint where a lot of detail would then disappear. So it's revelatory to see it. But I also really wanted us to be making a case. I mean, I'll just say it. I think Jack... I think that Jack Kirby is one of the most important American artists of the last 100 years in any medium. He happened to work in comics, but what he was a true visionary genius, and his influence upon the worlds of music, cinema, contemporary fiction, as well as comics, is even greater today than it was during his own lifetime. That, for me, really is a sign of the importance of the work. His reputation is only greater now than it was then. So I feel pretty confident making this case.
Well, and a nice thing about this exhibition is that we have the opportunity to not only showcase the comic work, but the private works, the personal things, this collage piece that you see above us here. We have a number of pieces on loan from members of the Kirby family. We have a number of pieces that he did do in his free hours. Yeah. So we are able to display a much rounder view of his creativity and artistry. There are many heroes represented in there. You'll see many characters and pieces that you recognize. You will also see things like this painting, The Dream Machine. That is actually a painting. That one is not a collage.
Oh, yeah.
Though you can tell there is a shared visual sensibility no matter what medium Jack is working in. It always looks like Jack's work.
Yes. And his interest in technology and the imaginative possibilities of technology starts to become more apparent in the sort of second half of his career, from which this work comes.
Thank you. I'd like to end with Jack. We have this amazing Hanukkah card that he drew for a family friend here on the right, but we also just have this image of Jack working. When we were gathering the family photos, about 25% of those photos were Jack's back, Jack working at his drawing board. And I just wondered if you could talk about what his impact was for other artists of the time, and also for sort of the world of comics and Comic-Con.
Well, Jack, again, the name of the exhibition is Jack Kirby, Heroes in Humanity. And that really represents sort of it's the perfect encapsulation of our approach to this. Jack Kirby was an inspirational figure artistically. Personally, he was also an inspirational figure. He and his wife Roz and their family moved to Southern California in the late 1960s. From New York, they moved to the Los Angeles area, first down to Irvine and then up to Thousand Oaks. And he moved from his basement studio in Long Island to this studio that had picture windows and could look out on the hills of Los Angeles. And in the process, they also began welcoming people into their home regularly. There was a large fandom community already springing up around Southern California, and Jack and Roz were known for just welcoming in guests, giving them sandwiches, and then speaking to them. Jack would tell war stories, and they would sit around the table, and then Jack would go back to drawing, but continue to regale them with stories somehow while he was drawing these amazingly intricate pieces. And they were people who were, Jack and Roz were both incredibly influential to a number of creators, fans. They were guests at the first Golden State Comic Convention that became the San Diego Comic-Con. We now know that welcomes, 400,000 people every year to San Diego. When they were guests for the first one, it was a show of about 150 people in a hotel basement in, was it the Cortez, the Washington? I forget which, yeah. Okay. Roosevelt. Oh. Thank you. And even then, Jack said, "Oh, this will be bigger someday." There are numerous stories from people, anecdotes from various people who knew him, where he was like, "Oh, someday movie studios they'll bring their stuff here to promote it. There'll be hundreds of thousands of people here sharing in the love of these things." And with their work in that community is what helped create that. They were also very active in the Jewish community. Jack did. You'll see a piece in the exhibition that he did for a charity auction. They spent time at the temple. Jack would, give away drawings constantly, which was probably maybe not the most financially sound thing to do, but it was an example of his generosity. And that card is one. They had their Hanukkah cards that they were sending out to family and friends, and the one of them he just drew the thing. Ben Grimm, again, his personal stand-in, and sent that to one of their family friends, and we're lucky enough to have that original piece on display in the galleries.
Yes. So Jack knew that the thing was Jewish, but what I'm told, again, apparently he used to say when people looked at the original was, "It's a Jewish thing." So which I do like. I love that idea, but. In terms of this influence and reputation, I mean, for his nickname within the industry was King Kirby. Kirby was the king of comics. But outside of that professional world, his name was less well known. And one of the things that I love finding a Kirby fan in any other media. You talk to. Talking to a filmmaker, talking to a film producer, talking to somebody in music, talking to any number of people in different creative fields, and then you find that you can bond over this, and it's all ages, all races, all genders. Kirby appeals universally to the people that Kirby appeals to, and part of the goal of this show is to just try to sort of widen that circle, and really, I think I think it's a little bit of a cultural injustice that his name is not as well known as that his characters are so much more well known than he is. That you can find his actual drawings on T-shirts and lunchboxes and action figure packages, and but that people don't know that this all comes from one hand, one mind, one imagination, one pencil. And one of the reasons that I felt that I was so happy when Michelle and the good folks here at the Skirball agreed to do this is that it feels like the beginning of redressing that balance and setting right really a historical wrong, because Jack's influence is far, far greater than his fame would suggest.
Yeah, and I really am so thrilled that we are doing it here, and that we are, Jack's work was primarily made for his own private entertainment or for publication, to be able to present it in this space, to be able to have the three-dimensional representations, the costumes from Marvel Studios films of the characters that he created or the visuals that he inspired, showing really the width and breadth of Jack Kirby's creativity and artistry. And again, the core humanity at the center of it. Those are, you will see those personal things that even in the most fantastical situations, as you were saying, there's always that really human element. And that's really, I think, what we tried to do with the show is we never got a chance to meet Jack, either of us, but we feel like that we've been able to really bring him to life in a really wonderful way within these galleries.
And he's been with me all my life.
I think that's the perfect place to end this conversation. Ben and Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I want to thank our both sets of conversationalists who were on stage. If you didn't happen to get a biography of the people who are speaking today, they're right by the door. Marisa is holding them up in case you're interested. And if you'd like to, if you have questions or thoughts, our team is going to be around for a few minutes, and you're welcome to come up. And we really hope you enjoy these exhibitions and help us spread the word. Thank you.